He walked into the bank every morning at exactly 8:45 a.m. sharp suit, polished shoes, a reassuring smile for the security guard at the entrance. He greeted colleagues by name, asked about their families, shared a joke over coffee. To everyone around him, he was a picture of professionalism, an experienced banker who had spent years earning the trust of his employers, his clients, and the financial system itself. For over a decade, his signature authorized transactions worth millions. He was responsible for accounts that stretched across cities, across countries. He understood the system, the regulations, the weaknesses, and he knew, better than anyone, where no one was looking. Then one day, a routine audit flagged an inconsistency, a discrepancy so small it should have been nothing, a rounding error, perhaps a minor data issue. But as one employee looked closer, a pattern began to emerge. Tiny amounts missing across thousands of accounts, each one seemingly insignificant. Until they weren't. It had taken years. The money didn't disappear all at once. It was removed in fractions, decimals, almost invisibly. Yet by the time anyone noticed, $1 million had already vanished. No forced entries. No alarms. No missing cash from the vaults. Just numbers. Just transactions. Just a system that had been quietly manipulated by the very person trusted to protect it. How does someone steal $1 million without a single person noticing? How do you commit a crime so flawlessly that for years it isn't even considered a crime at all? And when it finally unravels, where's the money go? This is a story of the banker who took everything without ever lifting a finger. The financial world operates on trust. A trust that is rarely questioned, rarely broken. People deposit their money. Institutions move it. Numbers shift on a screen, and wealth, often unseen, intangible, changes hands. Most never think twice about it. They assume security, regulation, oversight. But what if those safeguards weren't as solid as they seemed? What if, in the very heart of the system designed to protect millions, someone found a way to take what wasn't theirs, slowly, carefully, without a single alarm being triggered? This is exactly what happened at Blackwell and Sons, a respected institution with a history spanning over a century. Located in the heart of the city's financial district, the bank was known for its exclusivity. It wasn't a place where everyday customers came to open checking accounts. It was a private bank, catering to high-net-worth individuals, corporate clients, and investment firms. The kind of place where discretion was not just expected, it was guaranteed. For years, Blackwell and Sons operated like a well-oiled machine. Transactions worth millions moved through its systems daily. The bank handled investments, processed wire transfers, managed international accounts. It had layers of security, automated systems, internal auditors, mechanisms designed to prevent fraud, to ensure no one could manipulate the flow of money undetected. And yet, despite all of this, one man did just that. His name was John Matthews, a name that, to many, meant nothing. He wasn't a CEO. He wasn't a shareholder. He wasn't the face of the bank. He was something much more dangerous. A man in the middle, a person who sat just far enough below the top levels of power to avoid scrutiny, yet high enough to have access to the inner workings of the financial system. A senior financial officer, a title that gave him control over account transactions, approvals, reconciliations. A position that required him to monitor financial records, authorize transfers, and ensure compliance with regulatory standards. He wasn't the kind of person anyone would suspect. If you saw him, you wouldn't look twice. Late 40s, neatly dressed, well-spoken, but never the loudest voice in the room. A man who showed up early, stayed late, never complained. The kind of employee a company values because he does his job without question. A man who was respected, trusted, invisible. And that was exactly what made him so dangerous. John Matthews had worked at the bank for over a decade. He had seen employees come and go. He had witnessed changes in leadership, in technology, in security protocols. He understood how the system evolved, where it strengthened, where it remained weak. He knew what auditors looked for, and, more importantly, what they didn't. He understood the complexity of transactions, the layers of verification, the way financial reports were structured. And, in time, he found something most never do, a flaw. A tiny, insignificant vulnerability buried deep within the bank's financial system, a weakness that wasn't visible on the surface, that no security measure flagged as a risk. It wasn't a gap in the firewalls or a breach in cybersecurity. It was something much simpler, something hidden in the very nature of how money moved within the institution, a process that had existed for years, overlooked, unquestioned, a flaw that, if exploited carefully, methodically, could allow someone to siphon money in a way that no one would ever notice. He didn't act immediately. He studied it, observed how transactions were recorded, how discrepancies were corrected. He watched how errors, small ones, were treated. He saw that numbers, when shifted in tiny increments, disappeared into the background noise of financial data. A few cents here, a fraction of a dollar there, almost nothing, almost invisible. It wasn't greed that drove him. Not at first. It was curiosity. Could it be done? Could money truly be taken without anyone realizing it? Without a single red flag being raised? He ran simulations, created test models. He found that under the right conditions, with precise calculations, fractions of a cent could be diverted from thousands of transactions, accumulating slowly over time into accounts that, on paper, didn't even exist. A system so subtle that even an audit wouldn't immediately detect it. If done carefully, patiently, the amounts would be absorbed into the sheer volume of daily transactions, never drawing attention. But he knew patience was key. If he took too much too soon, someone would notice. If the pattern was obvious, it could be traced. The trick was to make it blend in, to let the system hide it for him. And so, over the course of months, then years, John Matthews did exactly that. At first, the numbers were almost laughably small. A few dollars a week, then a few hundred. No one noticed. No one ever questioned it. The system ran as it always had, moving money, shifting figures, correcting itself. He was careful, patient, methodical, and as time passed, those numbers began to grow. Yet the bank continued operating as usual. The executives discussed quarterly profits. The analysts reviewed financial reports. No alarms went off. No missing money was ever reported. John Matthews had found a way to steal without stealing, to take money without ever physically touching it. And as his confidence grew, so did the amounts. Years passed. 1,000 here, 10,000 there, then 50, 100, more. Yet inside Blackwell and Sons, no one saw it happening. No one suspected a thing. At least, not at first. It began with a decimal, a fraction of a cent, an amount so small, so insignificant, that it didn't even exist in the real world, only on paper, only in numbers. It was called salami slicing, a method so subtle, so precise, that it had been theorized for years but rarely executed successfully. The idea was simple. Take tiny amounts from thousands, even millions of transactions, amounts so small they would never be noticed individually. A half cent here, a fraction of a penny there. Numbers that, when rounded down, disappeared into the void of financial data. John Matthews understood the brilliance of the system. Banks dealt with millions of transactions daily. Financial data constantly fluctuated. Audits focused on large, suspicious transactions, not the smallest increments. The numbers he was manipulating weren't technically disappearing. They were simply being redirected, reassigned, moved to accounts that didn't officially exist. A shadow ledger only he had access to. John had access to the financial architecture of Blackwell and Sons. He knew where the system was rigid and where it had flex. He didn't need to alter statements or forge signatures. He simply adjusted the way transactions were processed. He created a series of holding accounts, shell accounts that weren't tied to real clients, accounts that existed solely in the digital space. He programmed them to collect a tiny excess from transactions, fractions of a penny that no one would ever reclaim. The amounts were absurdly small at first, so small they didn't even register as a transaction in the bank's ledger. The system absorbed them naturally, lost in the endless flow of capital moving between accounts. He let it run for months without withdrawing a single dollar, just to see if anyone would notice. No one did, and so he continued. After the first year, the amount started growing. Slowly, carefully, a few dollars a week, then a few hundred. Still, no alarms, no red flags. Nothing appeared unusual because nothing on the surface had changed. The system operated exactly as it always had. The only difference was that John had found a way to stand in the middle, siphoning wealth without leaving a trace. At first, he was cautious. He set limits for himself. Never take too much, never move money too quickly, never make adjustments too frequently. But as time passed, the numbers on his hidden accounts began to swell. 1,000 here, 10,000 there, then 20, 50. He started testing the system, pushing the limits, seeing how far he could go without detection. With each successful month, his confidence grew. He refined his process. He automated certain aspects, ensuring the amounts varied randomly, mimicking normal financial fluctuations. He knew how audits worked, and he designed his theft to blend seamlessly into the noise. By year 3, he had accumulated over $250,000, and still no one had noticed. Then, a routine financial reconciliation report landed on the desk of a junior analyst. His name was Daniel Reeves. Fresh out of university, eager, meticulous, the kind of person who believed in numbers. He wasn't senior enough to make major decisions, but he was assigned to review minor inconsistencies flagged by the system. Most of them were nothing: data mismatches, clerical errors, transaction delays. Simple things. He had done these reviews 100 times before, correcting minor figures, ensuring the numbers balanced. But on this particular day, something felt off. The discrepancy was tiny, a minuscule shift in rounding errors. Something the system should have corrected automatically. And yet, when Daniel traced the numbers, they didn't lead where they should have. The amount was small, barely noticeable, but when he ran a secondary check, he found another, then another. A pattern began to emerge. Daniel flagged the anomaly. He prepared a report, sent it up the chain to his supervisor. A minor inconsistency in digital rounding, something that, in theory, shouldn't happen. He expected concern, questions. Instead, he was told not to worry about it. The amount was too small. It's a rounding issue, his manager said. The system corrects these things on its own. For a moment, he let it go. After all, who was he to question a bank that had operated for 100 years? But something in the back of his mind wouldn't let it rest. What if it wasn't a system error? What if someone was manipulating the numbers? He decided to dig deeper. John had always been careful, but confidence breeds mistakes. The more he took, the more he believed no one was watching. By this point, he had stolen nearly $750,000, but he had yet to withdraw most of it. The money sat in his hidden accounts, waiting. Then he made his first miscalculation, a minor oversight in a transfer. A fraction of a cent too much taken from an account tied to a high-net-worth client. A transaction that should have remained invisible, except this time, it didn't. Daniel found it. A single transaction that didn't follow the pattern of legitimate financial movement. It was small, barely a blip, but it was enough for him to run a historical comparison. And when he did, he saw the same irregularities repeated hundreds of times. Still, it wasn't proof. Not yet. It was just a theory, a gut feeling. But Daniel was no longer willing to ignore it. If you were in Daniel's shoes, would you have caught this? Daniel took his findings to the senior auditor. This time, he didn't frame it as a system error. He framed it as potential fraud. The reaction was immediate. "You're reaching," they told him. "Do you have hard proof?" And that was the problem. He didn't. The numbers were suspicious, but there was no clear evidence of theft. No missing money, no falsified records, just a pattern that shouldn't be there. So Daniel made a decision. He would keep watching. Quietly, patiently. If someone inside the bank was stealing, he would find them. He would wait for them to make a mistake big enough to expose the truth. What Daniel didn't know was that mistake was coming sooner than he expected. For years, John Matthews had operated in the shadows, hidden beneath layers of financial complexity, manipulating numbers without a trace. He had studied the system, understood its weaknesses, and exploited them with precision. The amounts he siphoned grew steadily. Yet not a single red flag had been raised. Not a single alarm had been triggered. But even the most perfect crimes have an expiration date. And John's was about to arrive sooner than he ever expected. It wasn't a forensic accountant or an aggressive internal investigation that first uncovered John's scheme. It was a simple routine IT security audit. Every 6 months, Blackwell and Sons conducted mandatory cybersecurity checks, a formality designed to ensure compliance with regulatory policies. These audits weren't specifically looking for financial fraud. They focused on cybersecurity threats, external hacking attempts, unauthorized logins, digital vulnerabilities. One afternoon, an IT auditor named Mark Ellis was running system integrity scans when he noticed something peculiar. A series of logins to internal banking systems. Nothing outwardly suspicious, but the timestamps didn't quite make sense. Transactions were being processed at odd hours, in patterns that didn't align with standard banking activity. These logins weren't outside breaches. They came from inside the bank. Mark flagged the activity, at first assuming it was a glitch, a software issue. But the more he dug, the stranger it seemed. The transactions weren't large, but they were frequent. Small amounts disappearing from thousands of different accounts, spread out over years. On paper, the losses were invisible. But when compiled together, the numbers painted a very different picture. Someone inside the bank had been moving money, and they had been doing it for a long time. Mark escalated his findings to the internal fraud department. At first, they were skeptical. Fraud in a bank like Blackwell and Sons was almost unthinkable. Security was airtight. Auditors reviewed transactions constantly. But then, Mark provided them with something undeniable: transaction logs, repeating patterns, digital fingerprints linking every suspicious movement to a single employee ID. John Matthews, the bank's internal fraud team, initiated a quiet investigation. They didn't alert John. They didn't even change their security measures. Instead, they watched. They tracked every keystroke, every login. They compared financial records from the past decade, and what they found was staggering. Over time, John had rerouted over $1 million into shadow accounts. His transactions were designed to be invisible, never large enough to trigger alarms, never tied to a single account. But once investigators knew what to look for, the pattern became clear. John Matthews had been stealing from the bank for nearly a decade, and no one had noticed. John had always been cautious, but in recent months, something felt different. Audits were happening more frequently. IT logs were being scrutinized. He began to notice changes in the way his colleagues interacted with him. Subtle shifts in their demeanor, glances exchanged in hushed conversations. Something wasn't right. Then, one morning, John arrived at his desk to find his system access temporarily locked. A routine security update, IT claimed. Nothing unusual, but John knew better. The timing was too coincidental. His gut told him what he feared most. Someone was watching. He had planned for this possibility. He had contingency plans in place. He wasn't naive. He had always known that the moment he sensed danger, he would have to disappear. John had spent years preparing for the worst. He had created exit strategies, fake identities, offshore accounts. He knew that if the bank ever caught on, he wouldn't have much time. He had passports hidden away, cash reserves scattered across multiple locations. His escape had to be immediate, decisive. He left work early that day, making an excuse about a doctor's appointment. He drove home, avoiding his usual routes. He packed only the essentials, documents, cash, a burner phone. He planned to be out of the country within 48 hours. But John was too late. March 16th, 10:12 a.m. Blackwell and Sons headquarters. John walked into the building, his heart pounding, his mind already forming an excuse for why he needed urgent leave. He had planned everything down to the minute. In and out. No wasted time. But as he stepped toward his office, he saw them. 2 men in dark suits, standing near his desk. Federal agents. And behind them, his supervisor, his face unreadable. The entire floor had gone quiet. Conversations halted. Phones no longer rang. A stillness settled over the office. John didn't have time to react. John Matthews one of the agents said. John froze. His mouth opened slightly, as if forming words that wouldn't come. He could feel every pair of eyes in the room locked onto him. "We need you to come with us." John knew it was over. There was no escape, no loophole, no more carefully planned contingencies. Everything had collapsed in an instant. He was handcuffed, led through the office in full view of his colleagues. The man who had once been invisible, now exposed before everyone. As investigators combed through John's accounts, one final mystery emerged. Something no one had anticipated. The money was gone. Every single cent of the stolen $1 million had vanished. There were no funds in his offshore accounts. No hidden caches of cash. No evidence that he had spent the money. It was as if it had never existed in the first place. John had stolen $1 million without anyone noticing. But now, even investigators couldn't find it. Where did it go? For nearly a decade, John Matthews had stolen from Blackwell and Sons without raising a single alarm. He had taken over $1 million, exploiting weaknesses in the system, manipulating numbers in a way that no one had detected. But now, after years of secrecy, his empire of deception had crumbled. And yet, one question remained unanswered. Where was the money? John's arrest sent shockwaves through the banking world. Blackwell and Sons, once considered an impenetrable financial institution, had been exposed as vulnerable. The trial was inevitable. Prosecutors built their case quickly, presenting digital evidence of manipulated transactions, fraudulent account activities, and internal logs linking John directly to the theft. There was no denying what he had done. But despite overwhelming evidence, John himself remained silent. He didn't deny the theft. He didn't try to plead innocence. He admitted to moving the money. But when pressed on where it had gone, he gave nothing. "The money is gone," he told the court. "I don't have it." Prosecutors weren't convinced. They believed he had stashed it away, hidden in offshore accounts, waiting for the day he could reclaim it. Yet despite extensive investigations, forensic accountants, and government agencies working to track the missing funds, not a single dollar was recovered. It was as if the money had vanished into thin air. John was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for fraud and embezzlement. The judge called his crime one of the most sophisticated financial deceptions in recent history. But as he was let out of the courtroom in handcuffs, there was something unsettling about the way he carried himself. No fear, no desperation, no remorse, almost as if he had already won. In the months following the trial, Blackwell and Sons launched an exhaustive campaign to recover the stolen money. Forensic accountants traced every digital breadcrumb, every financial footprint John had left behind. They searched offshore banking records, cryptocurrency ledgers, private holdings. They combed through years of transactions, looking for any sign of a hidden stash. But there was nothing. The accounts John had used to funnel money were empty. The digital trails led to dead ends. No suspicious transfers to accomplices. No secret withdrawals. No real estate purchases. No luxury items. It was as if the $1 million had never existed. Some within the bank theorized that John had simply spent it, drip-fed the money into his daily life, disguised as regular income. But financial analysts disagreed. His spending habits had never changed. No extravagant purchases, no signs of hidden wealth. The numbers didn't add up. And so, the mystery deepened. What really happened to the money? Some believed John had created an elaborate offshore network to conceal the stolen funds, that he had anticipated his eventual arrest and used shell corporations to bury the money beyond reach. But if that were true, why had no records of such accounts ever surfaced? Another theory suggests John didn't act alone, that someone else had been involved, waiting on the outside, holding on to the money for him until his release. But extensive investigations into his personal and professional life found no evidence of such an accomplice. No sudden wealth among his associates. No unexplained financial activity in his family's accounts. The most baffling theory is also the most unsettling. What if John had engineered the perfect financial illusion? What if, instead of stealing real money, he had manipulated numbers in a way that created an artificial, temporary increase in digital balances? A system that allowed him to appear rich without actually moving physical funds? Some financial experts argue that John might have designed a scheme so intricate that, when exposed, the system itself erased all traces of the missing money. But if that were true, where had it gone? As John sat in his prison cell, the world moved on. Blackwell and Sons recovered from the scandal. The financial world reassured itself that such a crime could never happen again. But in the minds of those who had studied the case, a chilling thought remained. What if this wasn't the end of John's story? What if he had only been caught because he wanted to be? What if the $1 million was just a test, a trial run for something even bigger? What if, buried deep within another institution, another system, another set of financial records, John had already set up something much, much larger? What do you think really happened? The money was never found. The truth was never fully revealed. Did John Matthews get away with the perfect crime? Or was there something even bigger at play? Let me know your theories in the comments below. And if you found this case as fascinating as I did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more deep dives into the world's most unbelievable crimes.